Good morning. This is Inside Politics. Welcome to the broadcast. My name is Jesse Rogers. Thank you for making time. Of course, it has been a busy week. Finally, the Building Bridges Initiative report was actually presented to President Uhuru Kenyatta and in turn presented to Kenyans who are set to give their take on this particular report, which is set to bring inclusiveness, talk about the structure of government, a couple of changes in this particular report, but most importantly, has it served the purpose that it was meant to? Are we better off now that the report is released? And what way forward? Popular initiative or parliament? So much to talk about the report, the nitty-gritty details in terms of the fight against corruption, the structure of government, and inclusiveness in Kenya. We'll definitely delve into this, not forgetting the politics of the Building Bridges Initiative. The lines have been drawn. Politicians are actually aligning to whether they support a referendum or whether it should go to parliament. Not forgetting the drama we saw during the Bomas launch right there, where we had a couple of leaders raise questions, which we will definitely delve deeper into. Not just that, the Kenya Power and Lighting Company is actually pushing for an increase in tariffs, roughly 20%. Now, this will see households and a couple of businesses actually incur higher cost in terms of electricity. But with other options like wind, solar, and geothermal, is this move actually warranted? Because KPLC says they want to increase their profit margin. But at what cost? Welcome to Inside Politics. We now want to get started. Main focus of the day, the Building Bridges Initiative. Let's take a look at one of the stories we highlighted in terms of what this bill is set to take a look at.
This from State House late Tuesday evening may have ended the close to 2 years wait for the now famous Building Bridges Initiative report. But this document, to be officially unveiled on Wednesday, could as well have just set stage for a major shakeup of the country's political landscape heading to the 2022 polls. First is the recommended return of the post of Prime Minister. The PM is to be appointed by the President on the first summoning of Parliament, this being a person serving as an elected member of the National Assembly from the political party with majority members in the National Assembly, or the person who appears to have the support of a majority of the MPs, if no political party has a majority. The PM has to be confirmed by a resolution of the National Assembly, supported by an absolute majority of MPs. The PM shall chair the cabinet, wield the supervision and execution mandate of the day-to-day affairs of government, and shall also be the official leader of government business in Parliament. The PM may, however, be dismissed by the President or through a vote of no confidence in the National Assembly. But the watchdog mandate of Parliament on the executive could have also gotten a major boost, following a recommendation from the report for return of the post of leader of official opposition. According to the BBI team, this person should be a candidate who emerges second in the presidential race and shall also sit in Parliament as an ex-official member. His or her party, however, must not be a member of the coalition forming government and will be allowed to form a shadow cabinet, which will take a key role in question time when the PM appears in Parliament. A suggestion replicated in county leadership, where the runners-up in the governorship contest also becomes an ex-official member of the county assembly and the leader of the official opposition in the House. Under the current dispensation, National Assembly Majority Leader Aden Duale would be the ideal Prime Minister, with ODM leader Raila Odinga as the official leader of opposition. These suggestions now giving closure to the prolonged political debate leading to release of the report, which now heads to intense public debate with the likelihood of being converted into a bill to be introduced in Parliament for debate. As framed by the task force, the recommended leadership changes, analysts argue,
fanfare is being played.
Do not need a referendum to pass, as they do not touch on any of the issues listed on Article 255, subsection 1 of the 2010 Constitution, under which constitutional changes would have to be subjected to a popular vote. For instance, the presidential tenure remains a maximum of 2 5-year terms, retaining the constitutional powers of office as the head of state and government. The recommendations also do not touch on the supremacy of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, independence of the judiciary, and powers of parliament. A parliamentary amendment, should the report be redrafted into a bill, might thus be enough to pass the recommendations after robust public participation expected after the Wednesday launch. There certainly has never been scarcity of curative reports to Kenya's toxic power struggles. But with the Kenyatta succession politics already at a fever pitch, yet another round of uncertainty dogs the nation as release of the BBI report beckons. Murimi Mwangi, KTN News in Nairobi.
All right, now the report by Murimi Mwangi just highlights the depth that the Building Bridges Initiative report holds in Kenya, given the political clout that came with it. And this is what we want to delve deeper. Is it actually solving the 9 thematic areas that it was meant to look into? And are we better off with this particular report, bearing in mind there have been a couple of others in recent past? Now, already in studio to help me delve deeper into this particular topics that we'll be highlighting, allow me to introduce the gentleman directly on my left, Dr. Churchill Saoke. Thank you so much for making time, and welcome to Inside Politics.
I
know it's a new face.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's great to be here on a Sunday morning.
Well, thank you so much. He's a governance expert and will definitely help us delve deeper. And definitely not a new face. Dismas Muku, how are you doing, sir?
Fine, thank you.
Yes, I'm sure. We're excited to talk about this BBI report. And allow me to start with you. Just your reaction. The 9 thematic areas were set to be solved with the BBI report. Now that it is released, your direct reaction to it. Let me start there.
Well, you know, people are hoping that the BBI report was going to be what the doctors have ordered for Kenya, because as it were, Kenya is a sick nation. And we're hoping that a BBI would come and be the Midas touch. And then upon the release, we'll say Kenya is now a great country, and we know how to make progress. But outside the 3 aspects of the BBI report, everything else is underwhelming. And when you're going through the reports, you may require the assistance of an energy drink, or maybe you take some coffee, because really they tiptoed around the critical issues. But the issues which they raised and which I think are very pertinent, number 1 is making the office of the official opposition leader very strong. But even that one, they exercised a bit of caution. They should have, been a bit radical. But again, when you look at the composition of that entire team, it's made up of largely conservative people, retired public servants, clergymen. People are not given to radical ideas. One would have expected that if you want to make the office of the opposition leader very strong, you indicate in black and white that they're going to be given, the office will be given a budget, so that the opposition leader and his shadow cabinet, in fact, have got a budget, and they've got the necessary infrastructure to work on. And because we are running away from winner takes it all, we should, maybe they should have reviewed the possibility of ensuring that all the Chapter 15 commissions are part of that office. Like, for instance, you've got the independent offices, the control of budgets, or the Auditor General, and a number of the Chapter 15 commissions. This BBI task force should have been brave enough to say, if you want to make the office of the opposition leader very strong, let's give him that position. Another thing which jumps out is that maybe 35% of our national resources should go to counter administration. That works out very well. And also the idea that majority of Kenyans do not know the difference between a cabinet secretary and cabinet ministers. Then now let's go back to referring to them as cabinet ministers. But more important, you have members of the National Assembly going to the cabinet. That would work well. But outside that, believe you me, it was really a waste of time. For instance, do you need this kind of task force to tell you that we don't need aflatoxin in Kenya? I mean, they said that's something they want to work on. Do you need a task force to tell you that on the 26th of December, it can be a cultural day? Do you need a task force to tell you that at IBC, maybe the staffers should be working on some contracts, on maybe 3 or 6-year contracts? So now you begin to ask yourself, what have these people been doing for 1.5 years? Because if you look at that report very well, you see there's a bit of grammar challenged. There are a bit of typos, but you know you can forgive them. But when you're looking at content, there is no, you remember in the old Greek society, the gentleman called Archimedes, you're trying to look for a eureka moment when you're going through these reports, but nothing. Instead, what you're having is more energy drinks or more coffee. For me, I found it to be very underwhelming, and I suspect it's the reason why a majority of Kenyans are not going to be reading it, which again is going to be a tragedy, because we've been held captive by the politicians. It was very disappointing when the MC, the Honorable Junet Mohammed, says that where he comes from, if Baba has gone through the reports, then everything is okay. I mean, if you are sick, you're suffering from, say, malaria, you're given medication. Are you going to give the drugs to your uncle or your mother to, take the medication so that you ill? Why can't we Kenyans stop running away from this thing called psychophants? It's about psychophancy that Kenya is bleeding. I mean, who tells you that the political leaders have got better IQ than all these other Kenyans? We need to go through this document, we read it, and then we form a position. But in my view, these BBI report, apart from those three aspects, which any reasonable Kenyan would have actually, over morning coffee, would have said that this is the way it's supposed to work, it did not deliver any value on Kenyan. And I think going back, let's just go back to our Kenyan Constitution, 2010, and implement it. Like, for instance, when you're talking about national unity and inclusivity, I mean, you've got Chapter 6 of the Constitution, and you've got Article 10. Those are sufficient. Why would you want to go through these BBI reports?
All right.
And in my view, the reason why we got a BBI, one of the principles, and I suspect it's Raila Odinga, wanted to use the BBI report to form a political party for 2022. So what he was probably looking at is forming, something like BBC, Building Bridges Coalition. Because you notice some of the people who spoke, Oparanya and Joe, it was not by accident that they're the only people who spoke. And I think Raila Odinga was trying to use now the launch of that report as a special purpose vehicle for his 2022 campaigns.
All right, interesting. So the opposition, office of the opposition leader, that's a win. Taking a look at the fight against corruption, there was a recommendation as well, and the devolution win in terms of allocation to counties. So that's what I get that stands out with him. What about you, Dr.
Well, for me, I think that it was really below my expectations, extremely, because I do not know the theoretical anchoring that formed the basis of the report, because there seems to be an apparent, there have been an apparent, they were trying to get out of getting purely parliamentarian or getting purely presidential, and trying to create a bridge that is extremely confusing and is actually likely to bring down the gains of the Constitution of 2010, specifically on the questions of separation of power. And when you look at some of the positions that are being created, you delve deep into them and ask yourself, the subjectivity of some of these positions to the office of the president, and how that would make them to do their job independently in the interest of Kenyans. It's very questionable. When we look at, for example, even corruption, they are talking about, the whistleblower is given 5%. How about if the person who steals the money offers you 10%? Will you go whistle the blower?
Interesting, yeah.
So these are questions of integrity that you cannot use the Constitution to solve. You need much more deeper things to deal with. The issues of integrity, you cannot use the Constitution to merely, we have the most progressive Constitution today, and instruments and tools and institutions that we can use to fight and instill integrity. All that we need is to deal with impunity and have leadership. The other thing that I find this report really misses on is on devolution. We are talking about 30% of county allocation. That is fine. The biggest issue on devolution, apart from the financing, has always been the fight between the two parliaments. And when you look at the time when there was a deadlock between the National Assembly and the Senate, over the 5 billion. I think it was about 5 or between 5 billion, isn't it?
Yeah.
The problem was not the 5 billion. The problem was who is calling the shots when it comes to the county, the amount of money being allocated to the counties. So it's an issue of power balance between the two assemblies. These are things that they needed to have dealt with. The questions about regeneration of more revenue for the counties, stimulation of more revenue for the counties. How could the national government be able to help the counties to stimulate more revenue? For example, by providing them with more tax, more taxation areas so that they can be able to be self-sufficient. These are things that needed to have come out. But then when we want to focus more specifically into the positions that are being provided for and that are being created, which are not necessarily even solving the issues of inclusivity, we are not going to solve the problem. When I look at this report, I see two things, Jesse. One, in 2022, I am not seeing it solving the problems that we have had in this country. That's one.
Okay.
Number two, when I look at this report, I am seeing maybe there is a game that we are not seeing. But one of the good hits about the report, especially the lounge, was that it somehow, and the president somehow used it to unify the Kenyans momentarily.
Momentarily. Emphasis on that.
Yes.
Well, the purpose of the BBI, the handshake, is because we were told the reason why President Kenyatta and Raila Odinga had to have a handshake outside Harambee House is because of elections. So one would have expected that this report would be very solid on electoral reforms. But it didn't capture anything around that. And also number two, on economic inclusivity. Again, absolutely nothing around that. So when you've been commissioned by the president and Raila Odinga for 1.5 years, then you come back and all you can tell us about IBC is that you are going to have a three-year contracts, and then maybe the chairman ought to be the CEO, and then you are very happy with yourself. It means you will not achieve the objective.
Okay. I'll allow us to acknowledge the presence of Jerotich Say. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you.
I'd like to start off with your reaction to the BBI report. What are the expectations, the 9 thematic areas that were meant to be solved, rather, with this BBI report actually done it? Was there anything?
Thank you, Jesse. For me, I like many other Kenyans who've read, the few Kenyans who've read the document cover to cover, I'm quite underwhelmed. I really do not think that this report captures what the purpose of the handshake was. But on the other hand, if I slant it a different way, the report does capture, in a way, the purpose of the handshake. And I went to the chapter that looked at divisive elections, and I said, I think this divisive elections chapter should be renamed the last 10 years of the Kenyatta rule in Kenya, because it really geared towards a space where a prime minister is able to come in. And when you read the fine print, never mind official leader of the opposition, never mind the deputy president or this imperial position that the president will take, the prime minister, who seems like a maybe modestly paid, humble civil servant, is actually going to be the machinery behind how government business is run. And when you look at the office of the prime minister, you look at the principal secretary in the Prime Minister's office. The principal secretary will be responsible or oversee or be the prefect of the principal secretaries in the ministries. That is where the power is wielded. And if the Prime Minister is going to chair cabinet, the sub meetings and be authorized by the president from time to time to chair those meetings, behind the scenes, the principal secretaries will continue to grind and drive the wheels of what the government does. So what I see in this divisive elections and then the reorganizing of the structure is you have an imperial president, you have ministers who have also largely reverted to a very ceremonial imperial role, unless you're able to find ministers who can align themselves with what the principal secretaries have in line to do. And what also really bothered me is the fact that principal secretaries no longer need to be vetted. They say, oh, to avoid the politicization, they just have an accountability and administrative function. They do not need to be vetted. So if we are not vetting our principal secretaries, And they're the ones that run the ministries with a largely ceremonial cabinet secretary going back to being called possibly a minister. What are we saying? And these principal secretaries will be managed by the principal secretary in the ministry, in the office of the Prime Minister. So this has created a way that the imperialism of being a president and sitting on the throne still remains. Nothing has been put in a way that circumvents, but it circumnavigates aspects of the Constitution. So for me, I said it achieved its purpose. It was, for me, a massive exercise in retrofit to ensure that there's a whole bunch of blah, 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 where we are being talked down to as Kenyans, where we are being told we are the problem, we are the ones, we are corrupt, our families have broken down, we are unhappy, we lack values, we lack spirit of being Kenyan. And we are the ones being told throughout the document that this is what we need to do. But then they insert a few things here and there, and this is what I call the exercise of retrofitting. About the committee, the task force, possibly innocent people. Of course, people have addressed it already. I know my father was on the task force. Yes. But it is really, I believe, 14 people brought together to put together a report based on a brief that they were given. But I know that there are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people, I suspect, I don't know, I suspect, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people who knew the real purpose behind this report, which is basically a stepping stone to the next step, and the next step, and the next step, which is finally the final 10 years of succession for a particular family. Thereafter, the dynasties can keep doing what they need to do. So for me, I look at it and say, Kenyans, we are in deep, deep trouble.
And you know, on top of that, what was interesting is that this Prime Minister serves at the pleasure of the President. So the President wakes up one day in the morning unhappy over maybe a family situation or something has happened. At the flick of his fingers, the Prime Minister goes home. Or if he doesn't want to be seen to be a one-man directive, he can ask members of the National Assembly to kick him out. So essentially, this Prime Minister, in as much as we've been told that we'll have a very powerful office, we'll be working at the pleasure of the President. And when the President tells him jump, it will not be why, it's how high.
But the President will never tell him to jump, because it's part of a concerted effort to consolidate power at the very top. So you will never be in disagreement with your Prime Minister. You have what you want as president, your Prime Minister is doing your bidding, you're seeing the trickle-down effect, and the dynasties all work together. This is all about consolidating economic power through politics. So I don't see even a point where there will be massive, massive disagreement. Those things will be sorted out either with a mini sub-handshake during that particular term, or they just go and close doors and say, hey, behave. But the idea is that there's now yet another, I feel it's superfluous. This is how we waste money. Why do we have a Prime Minister's office? But anyway, you know, it's yet to be seen. I mean, I said on Inside Politics a few months ago that this is going to be a massive exercise in retrofit. It's a Trojan horse that's bringing something else in, yet to be seen. But so far, from what I've seen, from what I've read, it is definitely headed in that direction.
You talked about separation of power earlier on. I'd be interested to know your take.
Well, just as Say has said, it affects the separation of power. The leader of official opposition has no, I mean, he's a person who can be removed by the president. And apart from that, when you find a scenario, if you get into scenarios where the ruling party has the majority, and you know, the report says someone who has majority in parliament is perceived to have majority in parliament. What does that mean? What are we talking about? Why couldn't you just outrightly say that the party, like many countries do, that the party that has the majority in parliament nominates the prime minister, or the leader of the opposition becomes the person who has the second highest vote? And then you have somebody who gets into parliament who is able to hold government accountable. You know, we are creating, and I agree with what says strategically, we are creating a monolithic political architecture that not only consolidates power in one place, but also kills divergent political opinions, not just in the House, but also outside. And that is most likely what is going to harm, moving on strategically. We are likely to get into some sort of single party state where you have not necessarily one party, but you have a political framework that is uniform. There is nobody like, right now, today, what we have today. I mean, we have different parties, but who holds the government in check? There is no position. That is what we are likely to have with this kind of report. But then, it might solve, and I can tell you for free, it might solve our problems as of now conveniently. But moving forward, it will burst. Because there is possibilities of the two families, and I'm sorry to express this. When you in the construction of nationhood, the powers of monarchs used to be very important. And whenever monarchs used to fight, the nation used to hurt. And the only ways that the nation used to be stable is to have the monarchs agree. And maybe this is what is happening in Kenya as of now. There is a strategic creation of monarchism in Kenya that if we are not careful as Kenyans, if it is institutionalized, we will have no power moving forward, even on the vote. It will never make meaning.
All right, now enough about the structure. Let's take a look, maybe at a win, 35% allocation to counties. Would this be something that would fathom, going forward, something that would actually benefit devolution?
Well, obviously, getting lots of resources to the counties is something which we should welcome. But even with the current constitution, nothing stops the National Assembly from even giving the counties 70%. So in as much as it's welcome, the 35%, it could even go to 50%. But I don't think it's something really to jump all over town and say, Eureka, we found it. Because the current provisions allows for that. In this report, we expected to see something that as Kenyans, we've not seen before. So that when you're going through that report, every time you're saying, wow, wow, wow. But this time around, when you're going through the report, you're asking yourself, really, for 1.5 years, what is going on? So in my view, that committee, they missed the mark, or as I has indicated, they had the terms of reference very right, so they knew what they were going to achieve. Because when you're talking about, for instance, economic inclusivity, that is the biggest challenge we have in Kenya today. It's not captured in the report. I mean, what they say is, we are going to encourage banks to give more loans. I mean, now, how does that work?
They're going to set up a designated development bank.
Yeah. How does that work? How does that work? Now, you begin to ask yourself,
yes.
the Kenyan voter, Moran, why are we allowing ourselves to be taken around small circles by these political elites? And which is why for Kenyans, we must take time to go through these reports so that when these politicians are speaking out, we call them out. Over the weekend, it was actually on Friday, it was very depressing for Governor Alias and Joe in Mombasa, the Mombasa governor, when he was at a rally somewhere, telling people that please go through this report into detail and then indicate that you need to be paid for your tea and coffee. I mean, so are you going to come up with a constitution where you are going to say, I want to be paid for my milk, for my tea, for my coffee, for my goats? I mean, what kind of constitution are we talking about? And which is why we must not assume that the political leadership in Kenya are so sharp more than the average Kenyan. Right. We must read it and tie it into pieces and tell them this is a joke. And you see, something else that I'd expected that report to identify. Right. They say that for Kenyans, we live for today. So everything we want to do is today, we are not thinking about tomorrow. And then we don't have any much trust or respect for our leaders. Then they should have taken the opportunity to tell us, as a nation called Kenya, where are we going to be, say, in the next 10 years or 20 years? Are we going to aspire to be, say, like Singapore? And then we do a critical path analysis. What do we need to do today to get into the chosen destination? Because we've been told by these reports that nobody's thinking about tomorrow. We want to consume everything today. But we are not given a path. And now when you go to international relations, and Dr. Saoke is an expert in this, look at what Kigali is doing. They're becoming the regional center for aviation. Mm-hmm. In the past, if you wanted to do aviation business in Eastern Africa, you come to Nairobi. But now people are going to Kigali. Then we are told Nairobi should be the financial center. So what are we doing to achieve those objectives? You see, for Singapore, they said in as much as there are tiny states, it's going to be the global center for logistics. Hong Kong, they said we are a tiny state, we are going to be the global center for financial services. So for Kenya, have we taken a decision? What do you want to achieve? As it is right now, we are flying blind and we are shooting in the dark and hoping that this report is going to take us anywhere. But you know, the people who have got the highest level of political capital, for them, they're happy with their bank balances. So they're taking us around small circles. Right now, we'll be talking about BBI till the cows come home. But guess what? Many people tonight are going to sleep on an empty tummy. We've had plenty of water. The minister responsible for mining this water is going to be addressing a rally somewhere, and all this water will go to the ocean. We are not harvesting this water. And those are the critical issues we are supposed to be doing. If we implement the constitution today as it is, and you get that BBI report, you can even take it into pieces, and Kenya will not lose sleep.
We'll move on. I really want to get your take on the juggernaut called corruption. Whistleblowers, a certain percentage of the proceeds. What do you think about this, briefly?
Imagine that Kenya has gotten to the stage where we incentivize integrity. That is what this 5% for the whistleblower story is. Imagine, and I give you a real example because we're getting to that, the Kenya power struggle that we have at the moment. We are involved in uncovering and blowing the whistle on massive corruption to the tune of 2.14 trillion. Is Cherotich Sei doing this so that she can get a 5% of that?
Well, you'll get 5%.
Not. I don't want the 5%. We have to consider the possibility that Kenyans are willing to operate on the basis of integrity, which is not remunerated, because it is the right thing to do. And this is why I object strenuously to the language of this report that paints us out to be this amoral, crazy, wild group of people that we even have to be persuaded and bembelezwad to blow the whistle. We don't need to incentivize it. But I want to say something about the counties that you had. Oh, also about corruption.
Okay.
There's very strong, you talked about corruption. There's very strong language. Anti-corruption. I read some really strongly worded paragraphs. The question is, so what? You know, they talked about something that there was one paragraph, I forget exactly where it was, where it was absolutely describing, for me, the workings of the Ministry of Energy and the cartels that have captured it, and the low appetite we should have for cartels. So what? Who's going to do anything about it? Unless the very top has divested itself of its interests, unless the very top is not involved conflictedly in these types of businesses, we will write about it, we will use the most flowery language ever, we shall use also extremely flowery language to condemn it, and nothing will happen. We have a constitution that should be followed. But let me tell you, my only worry about the counties, and I will stop right here, is that I feel they have been turned into super districts. And the governors are going to be just, you know, implementers of development. Even if you doubled that budget, the 360-something billion going to the counties, double it, it's still less than what the executive gets per year. So whatever you try to do to incentivize the governments to accept this new space where we are now going back into regional blocks, aka provinces, where legislation and policy will be activated, but not really at the county level, we have also turned the governors and the counties into toothless spaces where they're just implementing what they're told to do. So give them more money, less money, doesn't matter. They have been disempowered. And finally, the very little mention given to young people, given to food safety. I think there was one paragraph around under security, not even around corruption, because the reason why we have aflatoxin, why we have mercury in our sugar, why people are dying, is it's not a security and safety issue, it's a corruption issue. And it's touched in one sentence. Oh, we need to do this. Oh, we need pedestrian walks. What have people been doing in urban planning all of these years? Or who has been eating the money for cyclists and for pedestrians? I took a border here, and I had a problem with my vehicle earlier on. And as we were coming, I kept saying, may the good Lord protect us. Because they have to weave in and out. There's no safety worked in. So at the end of the day, this report is not valuable at all in terms of taking us forward as Kenyans, but it is very valuable in terms of taking 1 or 2 or 3 families forward.
Well, it's a matter of perspective. Allow us to take a short break. We'll be back with more on the